construction makers.
All right, so let's talk about OTKs, or one-turn combos.
Yes.
We kind of need to talk about, I guess, two different versions, right? There's kind of the two-card combo version, which is something like Splinter Twin, right? Where you combine it with Deceiver Exarch or Pestermite or whatever, some different cards that, in combination, they basically just win you the game if you get those two cards in play together. And then there's the one-turn combos that are something more like Storm, right? Which is that you're going to be playing a lot of cards, and there's sort of quite a bit of skill expression to get to the point where you are playing the card that wins you the game. And it involves a lot of cards. But you're still doing it all in one turn. And both of these things are sort of problematic for different reasons. But as with everything else, there's always a caveat of there are no rules in game design, and you can make a game that utilizes one turn that players will still enjoy.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Shout out to you.
Is one example.
Whether people enjoy it or not is pretty loose, but you know.
Yeah. I mean, people still play it.
People do still play it.
The first thing we need to wrap our head around is why in Magic one-turn combos feel particularly unsatisfying. And in order to illustrate this, we're going to borrow a little bit of terminology from Brandon Sanderson, who is a fantasy author. He, during his lectures on fantasy writing, he has this idea that's called the 3 Ps of plot. And he discusses promises, progress, and payoffs as the 3 Ps that make up a plot. And as long as you are doing all three of these things, you theoretically will have a satisfying story. We tend to view games similarly to stories in that they're sort of machines that tell stories or math that tell stories. And so, just like a story does, a game has promises, it has progress, and it has payoffs. So in Magic, the sort of promise that the game makes is that you're going to have a build-up over time, and you're going to have an interactive game that's back and forth between you and your opponent. That's sort of the promise that they make, and then the progress towards and then somebody's going to win the game at some point. You're going to have, especially in Commander, this is something that's really keyed in on, which is that it's the idea of your deck doing the thing, right? That's the payoff. And I think Commander tries to make that promise to its players, and then the players reinforce that by trying to play in a way that those promises actually get to happen, which
this is the Battlecruiser sort of
it's kind of the Battlecruiser gameplay. The sort of promise of Commander is that your deck gets to do its thing, right? And over time, that's become less and less of a thing. And also, the further up the format you get towards CEDH, the less likely it is, and also the more adversarial it is for your deck to do the thing, because your deck doing the thing wins the game.
And this is contrary to the highest metas of other formats that Magic has, where oftentimes your deck doing the thing is still it's still apparent, right? So if you are playing a rush strategy, let's say you're mono red aggro or whatever, like you are seeing your deck do its thing on its way to the win condition.
Yes, your deck is doing its thing by moving towards the win condition.
And then the contrast to that would be like a control deck that is preventing that deck from winning, eventually leading to their own win condition as well. But it's not a non-interactive experience.
Right. Enter one-turn combos, right? And that is where we see that, a one-turn combo deck doing its thing ends the game, right? There isn't that feeling of progress necessarily towards an earned winning of the game. This is why a lot of these decks end up feeling kind of unfair to players, is because a lot of, I guess, the best one-turn decks have no indication of how close they are to winning the game. It's all handled through hidden information in your hand. This is true for Storm and also for Splinter Twin. Okay, so the idea of doing the thing is progress moving towards that payoff, right? So Magic's promise, especially Commander's, is that your deck will theoretically be able to do a thing that's cool. You will make progress to get there. Different levels of interaction are expected at different formats. And then there's a payoff at the end where you've done the thing and theoretically you win the game. These expectations are different based on formats, and they're also different based on games. So I do think that, again, the thing that one-turn combos share in common is that they subvert this idea.
Players sit down, they have expectations based off of the particular game that they're playing, and then suddenly that's subverted when their expectations are just they get the rug pulled from under them.
Functionally, we can look at one-turn combos and how they subvert the strategy circle structure, right? So if your game is using this particular strategy circle, if it's a player versus player game and it has resource management and it has interaction, you're using the strategy circle, which is rush is attempting to win the game now, economy is investing to win the game later, and defense is stopping your opponent from winning. There's kind of no getting around this idea of like, am I actively investing my resources to win the game? Am I actively investing my resources to get more resources later to win the game later? Or am I investing to stop my opponent? As long as the game has interaction. Right. So when we look at the way that decks are built, especially in Magic, they tend to lean in a direction, right? They're like, okay, an aggro deck leans in the rush direction, but it does sometimes get to play some amount of defense, right? Something like Lightning Bolt is a great example in that I can aim the Lightning Bolt at my opponent's face, or I can aim the Lightning Bolt at an opponent's creature that either is beating me or in the way of me beating them. When we look at a control deck, we're playing a lot of economy cards, or we're playing a lot of defense cards, right? Because we're not all that interested in winning the game right away, but what we want is inevitability. And a one-turn combo like Splinter Twin is such a small package that it fits into any kind of deck and any kind of control strategy and is the ultimate inevitability.
Maybe a good way of determining whether you have a problem on your hands is like how quickly can someone play these combos and how many cards are necessary in order to play the combo out. Yeah. So a 2-card combo is obviously the worst, but if it's a 2-card combo and each card costs 8 mana or something, then it's probably not as big of a deal.
Even when we look at the bracket system, right, for a commander, you can see that they've said no 2-card combos, right? They've honed in on 2 cards being the thing that's problematic, where 3-card combos you're fine because it's harder to assemble. But I do think, like you said, mana cost plays a big role here. Something like was it Sanguine Bond and
Exquisite Blood, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
and those cost a lot of mana. It's 2-card combo.
You have to pay like 10 mana or something.
A lot of mana. Yeah. To play them in one turn.
Right.
And then you also need something to like start it
right,
off
yeah,
too,
so it's
right?
a 3-card combo,
yeah,
really, yeah.
I imagine that many play groups are having that argument, which is that a 2 or 3-card combo? So when we look at sort of determining where these sort of OTK combos break down the strategy circle is that you can play them as the ultimate inevitability in a really small package, and you get to dedicate so many more of your resources towards stopping your opponent from winning the game, or stopping your opponent from stopping you from winning the game in the case of counterspells.
Right. You essentially, if it's only 2 cards, you basically only have 8 of the cards of your 60-card deck dedicated to you actually winning the game, right? And then everything else is just either moving you closer towards getting those cards or stopping your opponent from winning the game, which is huge.
Right. And we can contrast this with something like Storm, right, where you have to basically... or Dredge works this way too. Your entire deck has to be formed as this particular type of engine to win the game in one turn, versus something like Splinter Twin, where it's just, I can just include these 2 cards, put them together, and I win the game. Right? There's a much different sacrifice in deck building for a Storm or Dredge deck than there is for a Splinter Twin deck. I will say that a lot of control strategies are built in a way that they sort of get inevitability from a singular creature, but that makes it so that that path to win the game lasts over an extended period of time rather than just being extremely acute as I play the 2 cards. I play Deceiver, Exarch, and Splinter Twin, or whatever the creature you're comboing it with is, and you give your opponent one opportunity to stop you. It's, do you have the card that stops this? If you don't, I win. Right. And that is in contrast with, say, a control deck that just plays a really powerful creature that gets to attack for like 7 damage a turn.
Right. It's effectively your win condition, but it doesn't actually win you the game.
Right. It will inevitably win you the game, but it doesn't. It gives your opponent a chance to draw an out, and helps to story-wise, game story, to make it feel like, okay, my opponent earned this.
Magic, at least in its system, has something built in to where you can interact on your opponent's turn, right? So if someone is doing any sort of a 2-card combo, there's always the possibility that you have the counterspell, you have the thing to prevent them from moving forward.
There's at least a brief moment where you could stop them.
It's still not great.
Do you have it or not? Rather than...
I think, there's obviously been a lot of one-turn combos in Magic, but I think in comparison to other games, it's been significantly less. I might be wrong here. It's also been out longer, so it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that there's less. It's just that Magic has a high amount of interaction,
right?
So that it has a release valve in case something like this happens.
That's kind of what I mean. Is that like we might not hear about some of these as much because there is that possibility for interaction to prevent it. Where this is especially difficult to balance for, and where you have to really be careful, is for any sort of games that don't have interaction on your opponent's turn, which I think we've talked about this in videos before. This is kind of like Lorcana's system, right? Where I'm going to do a bunch of stuff on my turn, and I'm going to pass turn, and my opponent's going to do a bunch of stuff on their turn. There's zero interaction there, and to the point that your opponent's creatures essentially aren't even able to really prevent you from like going and moving towards the win condition.
Lorcana currently, I think, has somewhat of a release valve because you have to be able to like quest with your creatures to get the what is it called? Is it lore?
Lore.
Yeah, to win. So like you're counting from 0 to 20 to win the game.
You have to swing with creatures with Splinter Twin.
Oh, right. That's what I mean. Is that I don't know if Lorcana has any haste creatures currently, but this is one thing that like probably should be a blanket rule for them across the board, is that no creatures can go for lore the turn that they're played.
I think they
probably have already.
I feel like they've probably already done that.
I
don't remember what was in the base set, but that definitely seems like a go-to mechanic that someone would do. But yeah, really, this is just something that they have to be super careful about.
Right, because again, there's no way, like you if you end up with a one-turn kill in Lorcana, there's no way for your opponent to interact with you at all. Yeah. You just win the game. So let's talk a little bit about when one-turn combos might be okay. They might be the way that the game plays.
Yu-Gi-Oh! We're going to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh!
When we're talking before about the promises that your game has made, if you can effectively communicate to your players that the promise of your game is bombastic one-turn combos with small windows of opportunity to stop them and haymakers back and forth, then players might find this particular playstyle good,
enjoyable.
Yeah.
couldn't even get the word out. Couldn't even believe your own words.
There was not subconsciously not being able to say the word enjoyable around Yu-Gi-Oh, but no, take it away with your Yu-Gi-Oh knowledge.
Yu-Gi-Oh didn't always start with this. Yu-Gi-Oh has had a troubled history with first turn, one turn, etc. I think the first big one turn, if I'm not mistaken, was Magical Scientist, which essentially comboed with Catapult Turtle, which basically you just had a stack of cards in your extra deck and you'd bring them out for free with Magical Scientist, fling them at your opponent with Catapult Turtle, and you'd win the game. I think there was also maybe a combo with like Thousand Eyes Restrict or something like that, but that might have been a different deck that I'm thinking of. But now, over time, Yu-Gi-Oh's design decisions have sort of leaned into accepting one-turn, to the point that we were just searching before checking, because I don't play Yu-Gi-Oh super actively, so I got to be careful. But it seems like people are very open about like what are the current one-turn decks. That's not something you look for in Magic right now. Like it's not really something that you search. Like what's the popular one-turn deck in Magic at the moment?
You kind of do in CEDH. But,
I'm sure. That's not a real format though.
Well, people are playing it.
I know. Over time, Yu-Gi-Oh sort of changed. Like culturally, the narrative has shifted with Yu-Gi-Oh to expect this, right? That the majority of stuff that people talk about when they're discussing Yu-Gi-Oh is like these crazy chain of events that looks almost like you're storming off with a storm deck and Magic or something that's leading you to a win condition. What this has kind of forced Yu-Gi-Oh to start doing, though, is especially to prevent first turn, is they've had to lean into hand traps, which is essentially their form of like force of will. It's like free counter spells.
They're free counter spell. Yeah. Well, and I think Yu-Gi-Oh system in particular is susceptible to this because there's not really mana cost for cards. There is some limitations with like summons or whatever, right? But there's not.
Sure.
There's not. The limitations are pretty loose, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, if you don't have any kind of a resource system, you can just play all your cards. What's going to stop you from just winning the game in one turn, right? You need, and Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess at this point, created some amount of release valve, which is that, okay, well, I'm going to throw a meteor at you. Do you have, the way to deflect that meteor if you do, then maybe you get to throw one at me, and we keep going this back and forth until one of these meteors crashes into the other person.
And I think that's the thing, is that over time, because they've designed the game in this way, they've designed around this being an acceptable play style, right? Where if people are going in with this as the promise, the progress that they're making over time is all of their previously attempted meteor throws at each other, or like haymakers or something like that, before one of them finally is able to get through and hit the other one.
Well, this is also like a way to give a game a different identity, right? Like you're giving it a different story shape because of the way that the resource system and the way that these things play out feels vastly different than the way it, like, you know, the sort of slow build up in Magic versus, okay, turn one, we can just throw whatever we want to at each other. This is one of the reasons why, you know, the way that your resources work in your game determines the pacing of your game, and also your pacing is basically your vibe. Okay, so I guess what are some takeaways here?
Really, the big lesson is make sure that there's some indicator of what you could do.
Right, and this comes back to sort of a story structure again, in that if there's no foreshadowing to something that happens in the game, right? We can talk about Hitchcock's bomb under the table principle for a minute, which is effectively how to create suspense, right? You can create surprise by people sitting at a table and then a bomb just explodes. You can show the bomb under the table to the audience, right? In this case, the audience is the players, right. But without knowing that the bomb is there, then it's just surprise rather than suspense. And so some amount of signposting, some amount of foreshadowing, some amount of known information before the bomb goes off is important for this to feel like a satisfying conclusion.
And that's not to say that everything has to be played like physically to the field or anything like that. A good indicator of this is like, Magic's mana system, of how it's not only showing how much mana you have available, but it's also showing the color of mana available, meaning that there is a possibility that you could play something still, or that your opponent could play something, and you can see their possibility space and start to predict it, but you don't entirely know what they can do with their deck.
It's actually interesting because like net decks get such a bad rap, right? Because it's like, oh, everybody's just copying the same deck or whatever. But metagames are a way that this foreshadowing also happens, right? Is that you go, okay, these theoretically are the decks that I can expect. I'm going to build my deck and tune my deck, or choose a deck to play in a tournament that I think is a good matchup for the decks that I'm expecting to see. And then when you get there and you're playing against somebody and you go, ooh, I know what this deck does. I know what they're capable of. If they have this deck as Splinter Twin, I know that I'm going to have to keep interaction in case they're going to combo off.
If you hate one turn, smash that like button.
Also, if you like one turn, smash that like button.
Oh yeah, both. We want the Yu-Gi-Oh players too. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give us a little like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
Yeah, let us know some one-turn kills that you particularly have found either problematic or enjoyable. Sometimes they're cool.
Sometimes.
Storm, I think, is actually pretty cool.
Magical Scientist is not super cool.
Yeah, I've never played against it, so.
Cyberstein is also not good.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, that one's most famous.
If you want to continue the conversation, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.